Lieutenant Sarah Lawson stepped off the transport helicopter, her boots crunching against the gravel of the sprawling military base. The cold wind whipped across the tarmac, tugging at her uniform, and she instinctively pulled her jacket tighter around her. Her heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This was no ordinary posting. This was the base where some of the United States' most elite forces trained, preparing for missions so secretive that even whispers of their existence could cause chaos. Every inch of the compound radiated tension, discipline, and the unmistakable aura of danger. Sarah's small frame and youthful face immediately drew attention. Veterans, broad-shouldered and battle-hardened, turned their heads, some whispering under their breaths. "She looks fragile," muttered one soldier, barely audible over the whir of the helicopter blades. Another chuckled, shaking his head. "They really are desperate if this is the best they've got." The words stung, but Sarah forced herself not to flinch. She had heard it all before. The doubts, the assumptions, the casual dismissal that often accompanied women in elite military units. She had trained too hard to let ignorance dictate her worth. As she moved toward the main building, her eyes scanned the compound. Soldiers ran drills with precision, their movements practiced and efficient. The air was thick with the metallic scent of machinery, the distant hum of generators, and the sharp orders of commanding officers. Each step she took reminded her that she was walking into a world that didn't welcome deviation lightly. This was a place where mistakes could be fatal, and unconventional thinking was often punished rather than praised. Yet, despite the intimidation, a spark of determination ignited within her. She had a skill set few could claim, even if the men around her didn't realize it yet. The reception area was a flurry of activity. Officers and enlisted personnel moved like clockwork, each absorbed in their duties. Sarah approached the officer at the front desk, a stern-faced man who barely looked up. "Lieutenant Lawson reporting for duty," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of her nerves. He glanced at her file, nodded curtly, and gestured toward the briefing room. "You'll find your unit there. Don't waste time." No welcome, no encouragement. Just the cold efficiency that seemed to define this place. Sarah squared her shoulders and walked on, her resolve only hardening. Inside the briefing room, the tension was palpable. A group of soldiers eyed her warily, their postures rigid, expressions unreadable. Some smirked outright, others avoided her gaze entirely. At the front, Colonel Hayes, a tall, imposing man with a reputation for strictness, scanned the room like a hawk. His eyes briefly flicked over Sarah, and she felt the weight of judgment in that single glance. Hayes was a man who respected only results and experience, and he had yet to see any evidence that she belonged here. The whispers grew louder as she took a seat at the far end of the table, and Sarah felt the sting of scrutiny. This was her first real test, not of skill, but of endurance against bias. The briefing began with a review of the upcoming training regimen. Advanced tactical simulations, high-risk maneuvers, and coordination drills dominated the agenda. Sarah listened intently, analyzing each point. While others seemed content to absorb instructions passively, her mind raced with ideas, spotting inefficiencies in the proposed plans and potential hazards that had been overlooked. She scribbled notes in the margins of her pad, knowing that these observations could save lives. Her fingers traced the lines of equipment schematics and tactical diagrams, memorizing every detail. For all her youth and size, she possessed a keen analytical mind, honed through years of grueling preparation and unconventional problem-solving exercises. During a break, a few soldiers approached her, their demeanor laced with condescension. "So what makes you think you can survive here?" one asked, smirking. "Most people can't last a month in this unit." Sarah met their eyes without hesitation. "I'm not here to prove them wrong," she said calmly. "I'm here to get the job done." There was a flicker of uncertainty in their expressions. Some had expected meekness, but Sarah's confidence, quiet, unwavering, was unfamiliar to them. Still, she knew that words meant nothing in this environment. Only actions carried weight. Her first training session began the moment she stepped onto the field. The soldiers were put through a series of drills, each designed to test agility, teamwork, and quick decision-making under pressure. Sarah's small stature made her movements swift and precise. She dodged obstacles with ease, her mind calculating angles and potential hazards faster than her peers could react. Yet she noticed the frustration on the faces of the veterans. They were struggling with coordination and timing that she could see coming minutes in advance. Despite the whispered doubts around her, she felt a quiet satisfaction. Observation was her strength, and preparation was her weapon. By mid-morning, Sarah had already corrected a minor but critical error in the setup of a simulation. A misaligned barrier could have led to serious injury, and though her intervention went largely unnoticed by the majority of the unit, she felt a surge of accomplishment. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge that she could influence the course of events even in an environment designed to dismiss her. Each small victory fortified her resolve, and she began mapping strategies in her mind, not for personal glory, but to keep her unit alive when the real mission came. Lunch was a quiet affair. Sarah ate alone at the edge of the mess hall, observing the interactions of her peers. Some sneered, some whispered, and a few glanced at her with curious interest. The tension was thick, but Sarah thrived in it. She knew that respect was earned, not granted. Her mind wandered to the briefings and training exercises, replaying scenarios in her head, refining responses, and anticipating mistakes. This base demanded perfection, but Sarah was determined to show that even someone labeled useless could surpass expectations. Little did she know, the challenges ahead would test more than skill. They would test courage, resolve, and the very essence of leadership. As the day drew to a close, Sarah stood on a small observation deck overlooking the training fields. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the compound. The air was still, yet charged with the silent promise of trials to come. Soldiers moved in disciplined patterns below, unaware that one among them was quietly planning, analyzing, and preparing to turn expectations upside down. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of scrutiny and the fire of determination. She had arrived as an underdog, underestimated and dismissed. By the time the president himself would take notice, she intended to have everyone, including Colonel Hayes, realizing that she was far from useless. Lieutenant Sarah Lawson's second day on the base began with the shrill blast of the morning whistle, echoing across the training fields. She rose before dawn, her body stiff but her mind alert. Today wasn't just another day of drills. It was the day she would face the full scrutiny of Colonel Hayes and the other seasoned soldiers. The air was sharp with cold, carrying the scent of metal and dust, and Sarah felt the weight of expectation, mostly unspoken, mostly skeptical, bearing down on her. She adjusted her uniform and marched toward the assembly point, determination stiffening her spine. Colonel Hayes appeared on the field like a storm cloud, his presence commanding immediate attention. His voice cut through the morning mist. "Lieutenant Lawson, you will follow my orders. Do not improvise," he barked, eyes narrowing as they settled on her. The other soldiers stiffened at his tone, some glancing at Sarah with barely concealed smirks. She nodded curtly, hiding the flicker of irritation that sparked within her. She knew that following orders blindly wasn't her strength, but she also understood the timing of challenge. There was a way to assert insight without risking outright insubordination, though the line was dangerously thin. The morning's exercise was a tactical maneuver involving team coordination under pressure. Soldiers were split into squads, assigned to navigate an obstacle-laden course while managing simulated enemy threats. Sarah noticed immediately that the plan had a critical flaw. One of the approach routes could trap a squad in a blind spot where a simulated ambush would be unavoidable. She raised her hand, voice calm but firm. "Colonel, if Squad 3 takes the left flank as planned, they'll be exposed to a blind zone. I suggest a modified approach." Hayes' gaze snapped to her, cold and incredulous. "Lieutenant, this isn't a debate. Stick to your orders." Whispers rippled through the unit, some amused, some incredulous. Sarah clenched her jaw. She had anticipated resistance, but she refused to remain passive while danger loomed. The squads lined up, and the simulation began. Within minutes, her prediction proved accurate. Squad 3 found themselves cornered by a well-placed simulated ambush, scrambling to recover. Sarah immediately took initiative, redirecting movements, issuing quick corrections, and coordinating a countermove that minimized the casualties in the simulation. A few soldiers glanced at her, astonished at her swift assessment. Hayes' eyes, however, burned with a mixture of irritation and reluctant respect, though he said nothing. As the exercise continued, Sarah's keen observation became evident. She noticed subtle lapses, hesitation in timing, miscommunication between squads, and equipment misalignments that threatened efficiency. Each time she suggested adjustments, Hayes shot her down, forcing her to adapt quietly, almost invisibly. By the end of the exercise, the squads completed the course with far fewer errors than expected, but all credit would likely be attributed to Hayes' authority. Still, Sarah felt a quiet satisfaction. Even under direct opposition, her insight had proven invaluable. She had planted seeds of respect, even if only a few soldiers noticed. During the lunch break, tension simmered in the mess hall. Groups of soldiers whispered and laughed behind her back, commenting on her insistence and her small stature. "She's bold for a rookie," one said, shaking his head. "I've been here 10 years and I've never seen someone try to lead without rank." Sarah ignored the chatter, quietly nodding dynamics within the unit. She understood that earning respect required patience, action, and precision, not words. She also observed subtle alliances forming. A few soldiers who had witnessed her quick thinking began exchanging approving glances, their attitudes softening. It was a small victory in the slow war of perception. The afternoon brought a more demanding test, a timed strategy drill under simulated combat conditions. Soldiers raced through the course, evading obstacles and executing complex maneuvers. Sarah was placed in a squad with hesitant teammates who eyed her nervously. She quickly assessed their strengths and weaknesses, issuing concise instructions that leveraged each soldier's skill. Her calm efficiency inspired confidence, even as the simulation's intensity rose. Explosions of smoke and loud alarms simulated the chaos of battle, forcing decisions in seconds. Sarah guided her squad deftly, maneuvering them out of traps and ensuring their success while others faltered. Colonel Hayes observed from the sidelines, his expression unreadable. Sarah could feel the weight of his scrutiny. Any misstep could cost her credibility, yet every calculated decision she made reinforced her growing authority. Soldiers who had doubted her skill began taking cues from her, following her lead without hesitation. By the end of the drill, her squad had not only completed the mission objectives, but had done so with precision and minimal casualties. A few of her peers nodded toward her, the first genuine acknowledgments of competence she had received. Despite her success, Hayes called her aside afterward. "Lieutenant, I can't condone disobedience," he said, his voice stern but not without a hint of begrudging recognition. "You have ability, but the unit functions under strict orders. Understand that." Sarah nodded, not in submission but in acknowledgement. She understood the delicate balance she had to maintain, prove her worth while navigating authority. She had made her mark, yet she knew the real challenge was still ahead. That evening, Sarah returned to her quarters, exhausted but exhilarated. She reviewed the day's exercises, noting where improvements could be made. Every flaw in the unit, every overlooked hazard, was now cataloged in her mind, ready for correction. She understood that her journey here would not be easy, that every day would test her patience, intelligence, and resolve. But beneath the exhaustion, a fierce determination burned. She had arrived as the useless rookie, underestimated by all. By the end of her first week, she had already begun laying the groundwork to challenge every expectation. As she gazed out the small window of her quarters, the sun dipping below the horizon, Sarah felt a mixture of isolation and anticipation. The unit was hostile, the command skeptical, and the stakes impossibly high, but she had survived the first day. More importantly, she had survived it on her terms. Tomorrow promised more challenges, more scrutiny, and more opportunities to prove herself. And somewhere deep down, Sarah knew that the real test, the one that would determine whether she was truly indispensable, was still waiting just beyond the horizon. The morning sun rose over the sprawling base, casting long shadows across the training grounds. Lieutenant Sarah Lawson moved with quiet purpose, her senses sharp and alert. The events of the previous day still echoed in her mind, the whispers, the doubts, and the subtle acknowledgement from a few soldiers who had begun to notice her skill. But today felt different. A new undercurrent of tension filled the air, thicker than the usual discipline-driven atmosphere. Rumors had spread overnight. The President of the United States had taken a personal interest in this unit. Every movement, every decision was about to be observed under unprecedented scrutiny. Sarah felt a shiver of anticipation, tinged with apprehension. The President's attention could change everything. She had trained for situations like this, high-stakes, high-pressure environments where a single misstep could be catastrophic. But this was different. The entire country's faith in the unit's capability and perhaps her own future seemed to hinge on the coming evaluation. She adjusted her uniform, checked her equipment, and headed toward the briefing room. Every soldier she passed glanced at her with curiosity, suspicion, or in a few rare cases, admiration. The tension was palpable. Inside the briefing room, Colonel Hayes stood rigidly, surveying the assembled soldiers like a general preparing for war. Sarah took her seat at the end of the long table, her notebook open and pen ready. Today's agenda was stricter, more detailed, and deliberately challenging. The drills were designed not just to test physical endurance or tactical skill, but to reveal leadership under pressure. As the briefing progressed, Sarah's sharp eyes picked up on subtle flaws in the plans, flaws no one else seemed to notice. A supply line that risked being cut, a blind spot in communication, and a minor but critical oversight in the extraction protocol. While the others absorbed instruction, Sarah's mind raced. She mentally mapped every scenario, anticipating obstacles and planning contingencies. Each suggestion she had made in the past, now dismissed as unconventional, suddenly seemed essential, but voicing them openly was a risk. Colonel Hayes was strict. Even minor defiance could result in disciplinary action. She had learned patience, and now it would serve her well. Observation was her weapon, and she wielded it quietly, meticulously, knowing that the right moment could make all the difference. The first drill began on the expansive field outside the main building. Soldiers moved in coordinated patterns, executing orders with practiced precision. Yet Sarah immediately noted discrepancies, timing misalignments, poor communication, and subtle weaknesses in squad formation. She intervened subtly, issuing whispered corrections to her teammates, adjusting angles and signaling moves that maximized efficiency. To an outsider, it might have seemed like luck, but every choice was calculated, every action deliberate. Slowly, a few soldiers began following her lead, trusting the instincts of the underdog who had been called useless just days before. Word came mid-morning that the President's personal observation team had arrived. They did not interact with the soldiers. They merely observed, taking notes, analyzing, and sending detailed reports back to the White House. Sarah's pulse quickened. Every decision, every maneuver was now under the most scrutinizing eyes imaginable. The President's interest was not casual. It was deeply personal. He had a reputation for spotting talent, for recognizing unconventional brilliance where traditional methods failed. This was the moment Sarah had trained for, though she had never imagined it would arrive so soon. During the lunch break, whispers circulated rapidly. "Did you hear? The President is watching us." A few soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, others tried to maintain nonchalance. Sarah, meanwhile, observed quietly, taking mental notes on how morale shifted under extreme scrutiny. A few younger soldiers approached her cautiously. "Lieutenant, we noticed how you corrected Squad 3 earlier," one said, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and curiosity. Sarah smiled faintly but said nothing, knowing that words held less power than results. actions would speak louder than any praise or ridicule. The afternoon drills grew increasingly complex. Obstacles were intensified, timed challenges more rigorous, and simulations closer to real combat scenarios than ever before. Sarah's squad was put through an extraction exercise under simulated hostile fire. While others hesitated, she moved decisively, issuing commands, predicting ambush points, and redirecting her teammates with precision. Soldiers who had doubted her skill before were now compelled to follow, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes with awe. Her observations and quick adjustments ensured that her squad completed the exercise not just successfully, but efficiently, with minimal errors and maximum coordination. Colonel Hayes watched, jaw tight, his pride and skepticism in constant battle. Sarah noticed the subtle flicker of reluctant admiration in his gaze, a crack in the armor of authority he had built around himself. He was a man who respected results, even if he hated admitting it. As the drills continued, Sarah's quiet brilliance became increasingly apparent. Small accidents were averted, communication lines optimized, and her squad's performance exceeded expectations. The president's observers took meticulous notes, and Sarah sensed that her reputation was growing far beyond the base. By the end of the day, exhaustion weighed on everyone. The soldiers slumped in chairs, their bodies drenched in sweat, but their minds were alive with reflection. Sarah stayed late, reviewing every detail, replaying scenarios, and preparing strategies for the next day. She knew the president's attention would bring unprecedented opportunities, but also heightened scrutiny. One misstep could erase the small gains she had made in perception and trust. Yet beneath the fatigue, a sense of quiet satisfaction grew. She was no longer merely surviving the skepticism around her. She was starting to shape outcomes, subtly proving that the underdog had value. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the base in a deep orange glow, Sarah stood on the observation deck once more. The president's interest was a shadow looming over the unit, a test that went beyond tactics and endurance. It was a test of insight, leadership, and the ability to inspire respect in the unlikeliest of circumstances. Sarah breathed in the crisp evening air, her mind already running through tomorrow's exercises. The challenge was monumental, the stakes unimaginably high, but she felt ready. This was her moment, and she intended to show the country and herself that she was far from useless. The sun barely broke the horizon as Lieutenant Sarah Lawson stepped onto the training grounds. A chill lingered in the early morning air, carrying with it the scent of sweat, metal, and anticipation. Today was no ordinary drill. It was a major exercise designed to push the soldiers to their absolute limits. Every squad, every maneuver, every command would be scrutinized, not just by Colonel Hayes, but by the president's observation team, whose presence still hovered like an invisible shadow over the compound. For Sarah, this was the moment when her skills, courage, and resolve would be tested like never before. The exercise began with chaos. Explosions of smoke erupted along the perimeter, alarms blared, and the simulated enemy ambush forced squads to react within seconds. Soldiers hesitated, miscommunicated, and faltered, revealing flaws that had gone unnoticed in smaller drills. Sarah's instincts kicked in immediately. She observed the blind spots, the gaps in formation, and the moments when hesitation would have fatal consequences. Unlike the others, she didn't panic. She didn't freeze. She saw patterns and solutions where others saw confusion. "Move left, cover the right flank," she called, her voice cutting through the chaos. Some soldiers obeyed, some hesitated, uncertain of following a lieutenant who had been doubted just days ago. Yet there was no time to argue. Survival depended on immediate action. Sarah sprinted across the field, directing movements with precision, recalibrating strategies in real time. A squad stumbled into a trap, and she was there instantly, guiding them out before simulated casualties could mount. The efficiency of her decisions contrasted sharply with the disarray around her. Colonel Hayes watched from the observation tower, jaw clenched, his pride warring with reluctant admiration. He had spent years training soldiers to follow protocol rigidly, to rely on hierarchy above instinct. Yet here was Sarah, bending rules, improvising under pressure, and achieving results no one else could replicate. Hayes' eyes narrowed as he noted her decisiveness. She was acting against the letter of orders, but the effectiveness of her leadership was undeniable. For the first time, he questioned whether rigid adherence to protocol might be a liability rather than a virtue. The exercise intensified. Smoke grenades covered key exit points, forcing soldiers to adapt quickly. One squad froze at a choke point, trapped between obstacles and simulated enemy fire. Sarah dove into the thick of the chaos, redirecting movements, signaling new routes, and coordinating covering fire. Her small frame moved with speed and precision, each decision calculated and executed flawlessly. Soldiers who had doubted her competence now looked to her instinctively, following commands without hesitation. She had transformed from underdog to a pivotal leader, though the broader unit was still unaware of the depth of her abilities. Midway through the drill, a miscommunication nearly led to disaster. A squad failed to relay critical information about simulated enemy positions, leaving them exposed. Sarah didn't hesitate. She ran toward them, issuing orders, adjusting formations, and leading the squad to safety. Her actions were bold, unorthodox, and technically against protocol, but the result was undeniable. Lives were saved, objectives completed, and the exercise continued. The other soldiers watched in a mixture of awe and apprehension, realizing that Sarah's unconventional methods were not only effective but superior under extreme conditions. By late morning, the unit's performance had improved dramatically, but tension was at its peak. The soldiers' exhaustion was evident. Their bodies were taxed, their movements stiff, their focus waning. Sarah, however, remained sharp, her mind analyzing every variable, anticipating every move. She adjusted strategies on the fly, ensuring coordination and efficiency across squads. Her calm under pressure contrasted sharply with the panic and frustration that flared around her. It was clear to everyone, even those who had doubted her, that she was a linchpin in the unit's performance. The final phase of the exercise approached, a simulated extraction under heavy fire. The president's observers were stationed discreetly, their cameras and sensors capturing every movement. Sarah's squad moved through the course, facing simulated explosives, ambush points, and communication breakdowns. A squad mate panicked under the pressure, freezing at a critical junction. Sarah was instantly there, taking control, issuing precise commands, and leading the squad through the trap. The operation succeeded because of her quick thinking, decisiveness, and ability to inspire confidence in those around her. When the smoke cleared and the exercise concluded, Sarah's squad stood nearly flawless, while other units had faltered significantly. Exhausted soldiers slumped in the dirt, gasping for air, but their eyes held newfound respect for her. Even Colonel Hayes' stoic expression betrayed a hint of acknowledgement. For Sarah, this was more than a victory in training. It was proof that persistence, intelligence, and courage could triumph over prejudice and doubt. She had risked reprimand by acting against orders, but the results were indisputable. The underdog had not only survived the breaking point but had turned it into triumph. As the unit regrouped, whispers of her actions spread. "Did you see how she handled the ambush?" one soldier murmured. Another nodded. "She saved the squad." Sarah remained silent, surveying the exhausted soldiers, her mind already shifting to the next challenge. The real mission was still ahead, and while the training had tested skill, the stakes of actual deployment would be far higher. Yet for the first time, she felt the weight of recognition. Her insight, her courage, and her determination had begun to reshape how she was seen. Later that evening in her quarters, Sarah reflected on the day. The breaking point had come and passed, and she had emerged stronger, more confident, and more aware of her role in the unit. The president's observers had witnessed her leadership, though she did not yet know the impact. Hayes' judgment had shifted subtly, and some soldiers were beginning to trust her instinct. Tomorrow promised more challenges, higher stakes, and the possibility that recognition at the highest level might finally arrive. For Sarah, the breaking point was not an end but a beginning, a moment that would define her path forward. The afternoon sun glared down on the training grounds, bouncing off the metallic surfaces of vehicles and obstacles. Lieutenant Sarah Lawson's squad moved in precise formation, executing the final phase of a high-stakes simulation. Smoke grenades hissed and popped around them, sirens blared, and the simulated enemy fired from concealed positions. Her heart raced, but her mind was calm, sharp, and methodical. Every soldier in her squad relied on her guidance, following her instructions instinctively. They were no longer questioning her ability, at least, not those who had witnessed her skill firsthand. From the observation tower, Colonel Hayes' expression was unreadable. He had watched Sarah take control of the exercise with authority and ingenuity that defied tradition. He wanted to reprimand her for disobedience, for improvising outside the strict parameters of the protocol, but the results spoke volumes. Her squad was executing maneuvers flawlessly, adapting to threats faster than any other unit he had commanded. Pride, jealousy, and reluctant respect warred across his face. He had trained soldiers for decades, but he had rarely seen anyone match Sarah's precision under pressure. The simulated operation intensified. Sarah noticed that one squad had failed to communicate critical position data to the extraction point. The simulated enemy was closing in. Without hesitation, she sprinted to intercept, barking concise commands, adjusting formations, and signaling covering fire. Her small frame moved with agility, weaving between obstacles as explosions of smoke and sound filled the air. Soldiers who had doubted her now moved in perfect sync with her instructions, their confidence radiating outward. Each step she took demonstrated not just skill, but leadership that could not be ignored. Just as Sarah guided the last squad through a tight choke point, a secure radio line crackled to life. The entire base paused. The shrill tone cut through the chaos, silencing the alarms of the simulation. Colonel Hayes' hand went to the receiver, his face paling. "Secure line from the White House," he muttered, his voice tense. The soldiers froze. Only Sarah seemed to sense the magnitude of the moment immediately. The voice that came through was unmistakable, firm, commanding, and immediately recognizable. "Colonel Hayes, Lieutenant Lawson," it said. "Stop all exercises immediately. I want a full report." The President of the United States was speaking directly into the base's communication system. The line crackled with authority, every word carrying the weight of the nation behind it. Soldiers exchanged stunned glances, mouths slightly open. The drill, the simulation, all of it, halted instantly. Sarah's heart skipped. The President himself had intervened. Her mind raced through every scenario she had trained for, yet none had predicted this level of personal attention. Hayes barked orders to shut down equipment and call all squads to assembly points. The base, usually a whirlwind of controlled chaos, fell eerily silent. Soldiers stared at her, realizing that the very person whose authority had seemed absolute, the colonel, was now executing instructions from the highest office in the land. Seconds later, a secure video feed displayed the President's face on monitors across the base. His gaze was steady, evaluating. "Lieutenant Lawson," he said, his voice firm, "your recent actions during training exercises have been noted. You identified critical flaws in strategy, adjusted tactics, and prevented what could have been a disastrous outcome." A hush fell over the soldiers. Murmurs of astonishment rippled across the formation. Some of the veterans exchanged uneasy glances, realizing their assumptions about the useless lieutenant had been wrong. Sarah swallowed hard, fighting to keep her composure. The President continued, "Your initiative demonstrates the qualities necessary for the mission at hand. Colonel Hayes' training is to be adjusted to implement Lieutenant Lawson's recommendations immediately. I expect full compliance." Hayes' jaw tightened, his eyes flickering between disbelief and begrudging acknowledgement. For the first time, Sarah saw him at a loss for words, stripped of the authority he wielded so fiercely. The unit, stunned, slowly absorbed the reality. Sarah's judgment was now validated at the highest level. The President's message ended, but its impact lingered like a shockwave. Soldiers who had mocked her or dismissed her presence now regarded her with awe. Even the most skeptical veterans couldn't ignore the undeniable truth. She had been recognized by the commander-in-chief himself. Whispers and murmurs filled the air, a mixture of admiration, disbelief, and newfound respect. Sarah remained calm on the outside, but inside, a surge of triumph and relief pulsed through her. She had survived doubt, prejudice, and rigorous scrutiny, and had emerged victorious. Colonel Hayes finally broke the silence. "Lieutenant Lawson," he said, his voice measured but firm, "you will lead the revised exercises. All squads will follow your strategy. Any objections will be reported directly to me." His pride and irritation were evident, but so was his respect. The weight of authority had shifted subtly, and Sarah felt a quiet satisfaction knowing she had earned her position through skill and courage rather than words. That evening, as soldiers dispersed, Sarah lingered on the observation deck, gazing over the base. Smoke from the drills still curled lazily into the sky, and the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the horizon in shades of gold and crimson. The events of the day settled into her mind: the fear, the chaos, the tension, and finally, the recognition. She realized that being underestimated had been a hidden advantage. It had allowed her to act decisively, without pretense, proving her worth through results rather than ambition. Her mind wandered to the mission that awaited, the one that would test every ounce of her courage, intelligence, and leadership. The president's intervention had not merely acknowledged her skill, it had elevated her responsibility. She was no longer just a lieutenant trying to prove herself. She had become a central figure in a critical operation, trusted with lives, strategy, and outcomes that could ripple across the nation. The gravity of that realization settled in, but so did a fierce determination. She was ready. As night fell, Sarah returned to her quarters, exhausted but exhilarated. For the first time, the whispers of useless felt distant and meaningless. She had faced doubt, defiance, and extreme pressure, and had emerged stronger, recognized, and validated. Tomorrow, the revised training would begin, and the soldiers would have no choice but to follow her lead. The breaking point had come, and Sarah had survived, and in surviving she had become indispensable. The morning sun cast a golden haze over the base as Lieutenant Sarah Lawson strode onto the training grounds, her boots crunching against the gravel with measured confidence. The events of the previous day still lingered in everyone's minds: the shock of the president's call, the abrupt halting of the exercises, and the undeniable validation of Sarah's strategy. Today, the stakes were higher than ever. This was her opportunity to prove that she was not merely a competent soldier, but a leader capable of shaping the entire unit into a cohesive, efficient force. Colonel Hayes, standing stiffly at the edge of the field, observed her with a mixture of pride, frustration, and wariness. He had been forced to acknowledge her strategic insight, but accepting her authority was a bitter pill for a man who had spent decades commanding elite units. Soldiers shuffled nervously in formation, glancing toward Sarah with a mixture of awe and curiosity. The atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation, and the unspoken awareness that today would define the unit's readiness for the impending mission. "Listen carefully," Sarah called out, her voice carrying across the field, firm yet controlled. "We will begin the revised training protocol. Every movement, every decision, and every communication must be precise. Follow my commands exactly and we succeed. Deviate and the consequences will be on you." Her words were met with silence, broken only by the rustling of gear and the hum of machinery. Even the most skeptical soldiers found themselves compelled to listen. There was no room for doubt. Her authority was absolute, not because of rank alone, but because the day before had proven her judgment indispensable. The first phase was a tactical coordination exercise, redesigned entirely under Sarah's guidance. Squads were positioned strategically across the grounds, each assigned specific roles that leveraged their individual strengths. Where others had faltered before, she now anticipated every obstacle and contingency. Communication lines were streamlined, redundancy minimized, and every squad had a clear understanding of its objectives. Sarah moved among them, observing, adjusting, and giving precise instructions that ensured maximum efficiency. The change was immediate. Mistakes that had plagued prior drills were nearly non-existent. As the exercise progressed, Sarah demonstrated a rare combination of analytical skill and emotional intelligence. She noticed that a few soldiers were hesitant, still unsure of her authority. Instead of reprimanding them publicly, she gave subtle guidance, quietly building their confidence while maintaining the flow of operations. By mid-morning, those soldiers had begun following her instructions instinctively, performing at a level previously unseen. The once skeptical unit was transforming before their own eyes, reshaped not through force or intimidation, but through Sarah's clear vision and careful leadership. Colonel Hayes could not hide his astonishment. He watched soldiers move with newfound precision, responding to Sarah's orders with synchronicity he had rarely witnessed. The drills that had once highlighted flaws now showcased exceptional coordination. Sarah's methods, once dismissed as unorthodox, were producing measurable improvements in performance. Even the veterans who had mocked her before began to respect her authority, following her lead without hesitation. She had earned not only obedience but trust, a far more powerful currency in a high-stakes environment. The afternoon brought a series of advanced simulations. Explosions of smoke, timed obstacles, and complex tactical scenarios tested both physical endurance and mental agility. Sarah's squad excelled. She anticipated ambush points, redirected movements before errors occurred, and ensured communication remained seamless across multiple squads. Each decision she made was swift, calculated, and precise. Where chaos had once ruled, order and efficiency now reigned. Soldiers whispered among themselves, realizing that the lieutenant they had dismissed as useless was the key to their success. By late afternoon, morale had shifted dramatically. Soldiers who had been reluctant now sought guidance from Sarah, recognizing her insight and competence. Even Colonel Hayes, who had struggled with pride and authority, nodded at her quietly, acknowledging the undeniable impact of her leadership. Sarah's strategies had not only improved performance but had built confidence, trust, and cohesion within the unit. The soldiers were no longer divided by skepticism or doubt. They were a team united under her command. As the day drew to a close, Sarah oversaw a final evaluation, a complex extraction exercise under simulated enemy fire. The squads moved with precision, navigating obstacles, responding to threats, and executing commands flawlessly. Each soldier performed with confidence and accuracy, a testament to Sarah's guidance. She watched from the observation point, noting small adjustments, making precise corrections, and reinforcing effective communication. By the end of the exercise, the unit had achieved near-perfect coordination. It was a transformation that seemed impossible just days ago, yet now stood as undeniable proof of her leadership. Exhausted but exhilarated, Sarah gathered her squad for a debrief. She praised their performance, highlighting strengths and pointing out minor areas for improvement. The soldiers listened intently, hanging on her every word. For the first time, respect was universal. Even those who had doubted her initially now sought her guidance, their skepticism replaced by admiration. Colonel Hayes approached quietly, nodding. "Well done, Lieutenant," he said, his voice tinged with reluctant approval. "I underestimated you. The unit is stronger because of you." Sarah smiled faintly, acknowledging his words without arrogance. That evening, Sarah returned to her quarters, exhausted but satisfied. She reviewed the day's exercises and mentally prepared for the challenges ahead. The president's observation, the intense training, and the skepticism of her peers had all been crucibles forging her leadership. She now stood not only as a competent officer but as a proven strategist, capable of commanding respect, trust, and efficiency. The mission ahead would be the ultimate test, but Sarah was ready. She had transformed not only her own role but the unit itself. The underdog had risen, and there was no turning back. The night was heavy and still, broken only by the faint hum of engines and distant murmurs across the base. Lieutenant Sarah Lawson checked her gear meticulously, ensuring every weapon, and piece of equipment was operational. The classified mission had finally arrived, the one that would test everything the unit had trained for under her leadership. Stakes were impossibly high. Failure was not an option. Lives depended on precise timing, coordination, and the calm decisiveness that Sarah had spent weeks cultivating in her team. Tonight, her planning, intuition, and courage would face their ultimate test. The unit boarded armored transports, the interior dimly lit, every soldier tense and alert. Sarah moved among them quietly, giving subtle nods of encouragement, scanning for hesitation or doubt. Her squad had come far from the whispered skepticism that greeted her arrival. Now, each soldier moved with confidence, relying on her commands without question. They were ready, but the mission ahead was far from simple. Enemy forces were unpredictable, the terrain hostile, and the objectives critical to national security. One misstep could cost everything. As the convoy approached the insertion point, Sarah briefed her team in hushed, precise tones. Squads A and B will secure the perimeter. Squad C will move to the main objective. Communication will be continuous. Stay alert. Trust your instincts and trust each other. Her calm authority settled over the soldiers like a shield. Even the most experienced veterans felt the weight of the moment, but her clarity gave them focus. Hesitation had no place here. Preparation, strategy, and split-second decision-making were the only paths to success. The transports came to a halt. Sarah led her squad into the shadowy terrain, the moonlight faintly illuminating jagged rocks and dense foliage. Enemy positions had been mapped from intelligence, but unknown variables were expected. Her mind raced, calculating angles, routes, and contingencies. She signaled silently, and the squad moved as one, weaving through cover, communicating through gestures, and avoiding detection. Every decision was precise, every movement deliberate. The training had prepared them for this, and now it mattered more than ever. Suddenly, a distant explosion shattered the stillness. Enemy forces had spotted another squad, and gunfire erupted across the terrain. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "Hold formation. Advance left. Cover fire ready." Her small frame moved with astonishing speed, directing her squad with precision. They responded instantly, maneuvering around obstacles, suppressing threats, and maintaining cohesion. Panic would have been natural, but Sarah's calm decisiveness transformed fear into calculated action. Each soldier now operated at peak efficiency, executing commands with trust and precision. Midway through the approach to the main objective, a squadmate froze, disoriented by the sudden barrage. Sarah reacted instantly, moving to shield him, issuing rapid-fire instructions and guiding him through cover. The team adapted seamlessly, following her every adjustment. Explosions rocked the ground nearby, smoke and debris clouded vision, yet Sarah remained focused, analyzing every angle, anticipating every threat. Her presence was a stabilizing force, converting chaos into structured, coordinated movement. Soldiers who had once doubted her skill now relied entirely on her judgment. The enemy launched a counterambush, pinning parts of the unit in a narrow canyon. Sarah's mind raced, calculating probabilities, maneuvering routes, and predicting enemy behavior. "Flank left, suppressive fire now," she ordered. Her squad executed flawlessly, cutting off the ambush and securing the perimeter. The objective lay ahead, a heavily guarded communications hub containing intelligence critical to the mission. Sarah signaled for a coordinated push. Every movement was timed, every action deliberate, and every soldier's trust in her unwavering. The synergy was remarkable. The final approach was the most dangerous. Mines and automated defenses littered the ground, forcing split-second decisions. Sarah led the squad, signaling paths, clearing obstacles, and coordinating simultaneous breaches. Enemy fire intensified, but her calm, precise guidance allowed the squad to reach the target with minimal casualties. Her strategic planning and rigorous training exercises were now fully realized under combat conditions. Every lesson learned, every skill honed, was applied flawlessly. The team executed the extraction of critical intelligence, securing the mission objective under conditions far more dangerous than any drill. As the squad withdrew under cover of darkness, explosions and enemy fire echoing behind them, Sarah's heart pounded, not from fear, but from adrenaline and focus. Each soldier moved as a single, cohesive unit, responding instantly to commands, adapting to unforeseen threats, and trusting her completely. By the time the convoy reached safety, the mission was complete, the objective secured, and casualties minimal. The unit had performed beyond expectations, not through luck or brute force, but through coordination, preparation, and leadership forged in the fires of doubt and training. Back at the base, the soldiers emerged from the transports, exhausted but triumphant. Whispers of astonishment rippled through the unit. Even the most skeptical veterans were forced to acknowledge Sarah's brilliance. Colonel Hayes approached, face flushed with a mix of pride and disbelief. "Lieutenant Lawson," he said quietly, "you and your squad executed flawlessly. I underestimated you." Sarah allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The mission had not only proven the unit's capability, but had cemented her authority and respect beyond any doubt. Later, Sarah reflected quietly in her quarters. The mission had tested not just skill and strategy, but courage, composure, and leadership under life-or-death pressure. Every soldier had relied on her judgment, every decision mattered, and every result validated her methods. The useless lieutenant had become indispensable. The unit was transformed, confidence restored, and trust cemented. Tomorrow would bring recognition and reflection, but tonight was a moment of hard-earned triumph. Sarah had faced the ultimate test, and she had not just survived. She had led her team to victory. The morning after the mission dawned crisp and clear over the military base. Lieutenant Sarah Lawson stood on the observation deck, surveying the grounds below. The chaos and tension of the past days had faded, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment that seemed almost surreal. Soldiers moved efficiently across the compound, their steps confident, their expressions calm, but Sarah could sense the underlying respect that now coursed through the unit. Whispers no longer questioned her ability, they celebrated it. The useless label that had once clung to her like a shadow was gone. Colonel Hayes approached, his gait measured, his face unreadable at first. Sarah braced herself, unsure whether his tone would carry reprimand, advice, or reluctant praise. Instead, he paused beside her, exhaling slowly. "Lieutenant," he began, his voice steady but tinged with something unfamiliar, respect. "Your leadership during the mission was exemplary. You've proven not only tactical brilliance, but the ability to inspire trust and cohesion where others saw only chaos. I underestimated you, and I was wrong." Sarah allowed herself a small, sincere smile. Hayes' acknowledgement carried weight. It was not merely authority speaking, but the judgment of someone who had led countless soldiers through far less forgiving circumstances. The announcement came shortly afterward. A formal recognition ceremony had been arranged by the president himself to honor the unit's exceptional performance and highlight key contributors. Sarah, along with her squad, was summoned to the central hall. The atmosphere was electric. Soldiers lined the hall, veterans and recruits alike, faces glowing with admiration and curiosity. As Sarah stepped forward, her heart thumped, not from fear, but from a profound awareness of how far she had come. She had arrived at this base underestimated, dismissed, and whispered about as useless. Now she was standing at the center of recognition for courage, skill, and leadership. When the president's voice filled the hall via video feed, it carried authority, warmth, and unmistakable appreciation. "Today, we honor the members of this unit who have demonstrated extraordinary skill and courage," he said. "Special recognition goes to Lieutenant Sarah Lawson, whose initiative, intelligence, and leadership have not only prevented disaster during training, but ensured the success of our critical mission. Your actions exemplify the qualities of service, dedication, and bravery that define this country." Applause erupted, echoing through the hall, and Sarah felt a warmth of pride and validation unlike anything she had experienced before. Her squad members, once skeptical of her ability, now stood proudly beside her. Eyes that had once narrowed in doubt now beamed with respect. Some approached silently to offer congratulations. Others shook her hand firmly, words of admiration following. Sarah noticed a few veterans, previously vocal in their disbelief, nodding subtly, their expressions softened by acknowledgement. It was a moment of transformation not only for herself, but for the entire unit. She had shifted perceptions, earned trust, and led by example, changing the dynamics of the team forever. Later, in a quieter moment, Sarah returned to the observation deck. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the training fields where countless drills had tested endurance, courage, and skill. She reflected on the journey, the whispers, the skepticism, the relentless training, and the doubts that had once seemed insurmountable. Each challenge had forged her into the leader she had become. The mission had tested her strategy and composure, but it had also validated her perseverance and integrity. Recognition was gratifying, yes, but the true reward was knowing she had earned the respect of her peers through action, not approval. Colonel Hayes joined her once more, standing in thoughtful silence as they overlooked the base. "You've changed this unit," he said finally. "Your leadership has proven that sometimes rules must bend to reality, and that skill and intuition matter as much as rank and protocol. You've reminded all of us what it means to lead." Sarah nodded, understanding the significance of his words. It was one thing to be recognized by authority. It was another to change the minds and hearts of those who had doubted her every step. That acknowledgement was lasting. Sarah's thoughts drifted to the young soldiers she had mentored during the exercises. Their confidence, their trust, and their newfound skill were living testaments to her guidance. She had not only led them through simulations and real danger, but had instilled a sense of cohesion, responsibility, and belief in themselves. That impact, she realized, would extend far beyond any single mission or ceremony. Leadership, she understood now, was as much about empowering others as it was about personal achievement. As night fell over the base, Sarah walked among the grounds she had grown to know intimately, the field where she had faced skepticism, the course where her strategies had been tested under fire, and the observation deck that had become her quiet refuge for reflection. The wind carried a chill, but she felt warmth from within. Every obstacle, every insult, every doubt had been part of the journey that led to this moment. The useless lieutenant was gone, replaced by a proven leader whose presence would shape the unit and inspire confidence for years to come. Finally, Sarah paused, looking toward the horizon where the sun had disappeared behind jagged peaks. Tomorrow, new challenges would come. Missions would demand precision and courage, and leadership would be tested again. But tonight, there was a moment of triumph, clarity, and recognition. She had faced the impossible, survived the skepticism of peers and command, and earned her place as an indispensable member of the United States elite forces. The journey from dismissal to respect had been arduous, but it had forged her into a soldier and a leader capable of facing any challenge. And as the stars blinked into existence above the base, Lieutenant Sarah Lawson allowed herself a quiet, proud smile. She had arrived underestimated, she had fought for recognition, and she had proven that courage, intelligence, and determination could turn even the most impossible odds into triumph. The underdog had risen, and the world had taken notice.